speaking of, going from good things to very, very bad things. Very bad. It is very, very bad, Mark, in Philadelphia. As we speak, they have lost 11 of their last 13 games following a blowout loss to Miami. They held a team meeting. Unclear if it was players only, players and coaches, who called it exactly, but the locker room door was closed for well after an hour after that blowout loss to Miami, where reportedly Tyrese Maxey got up and called out Joel Embiid for being late to basically everything. So, which not a good sign for your superstar player, franchise player to, be tardy for things. So, Embiid again reportedly said, like, I'm having some issues understanding what we're doing out there in terms of playing. This is pretty bad, Mark. I know we're not even at Thanksgiving yet, but to be at 2-11 and to be showing no signs of life, and that's what that Miami game was. Like, that was brutal to watch. Like, they were just they weren't connected at all. The energy, the effort just didn't look like it was there. And now the question becomes, like, can it be organically fixed? And I don't know the answer to that. Like, what do you think? Like, is this a matter of, like, hey, we're going to get Maxey back soon. You get these three guys playing more minutes together. It's going to naturally get better. I think that's part of it, but also some of the guys that Daryl Morey brought in, Eric Gordon, some of the others, like, haven't played well. Like, they haven't been what the Sixers hoped they were going to be. What's your read on the situation in Philadelphia?
Yeah, it's very delicate. I don't think there's going to be, personality clashes or anything like that. I think it was, if you're a Sixers fan, I think it should be comforting to read that Tyrese Maxey talked to reporters about, the meeting and calling out Joel Embiid. I think that they get along fine. But as far as the bottom line results, yeah, they're in huge trouble. I know when they were in LA a few weeks ago, there was then a sense of calmness from Daryl Morey as well as the rest of the team. Paul George saying the ship hasn't sunk yet. And the reason for that was Joel Embiid was about to come back. Paul George was finding his rhythm after a few games with the minutes restriction. And so Tyrese Maxey's point, even after his hamstring injury at that time, was that this is good for us, because we're gaining adversity and it'll help us in the long run. And when I asked him how, he's like, well, every team is going to go through challenges. We're getting this out of the way. But even if philosophically they have the right pieces through ups and downs of their roster construction, they do have depth. That's just a lot of ground to make up. And I think that none of us can be naive to think that there's not going to be further injuries down the line. I mean, we've seen Joel Embiid's injury issues the last few years. We've seen the same thing with Paul George. So just to think that, okay, once they get everyone back, they can make up ground, they have to anticipate that they're going to deal with a revolving door of injuries moving forward. They're also going to have to deal with the fact that, the NBA getting involved notwithstanding, that the plan with Joel Embiid was to manage him with care throughout this season so that he could be healthy for the playoffs. So I think that when you look at the roster on paper, you would think, okay, they can go through this with absorbing Joel and Paul George in and out of the lineup, but not for a long period of time. And even though, they have serviceable players like a Kyle Lowry, Jared McClain's been a really good rookie. Clearly it hasn't been enough to hold the fort down. I think the other thing that's been disconcerting is there's been a lot of games where the Sixers are in it, and then all of a sudden they just wet the bed. They go through 3, 4, 5 minute stretches where all of a sudden things snowball and they're completely out of the game. When I asked Nick Nurse about what he makes of that, he thinks that the team's very resilient and professional and does all the right things, like in practice, film studies, everything else. But when it comes to handling that frustration in the game, he feels like, things get the best of them. And that's not a good sign of a team that supposedly has a lot of veterans.
No, it's not. And when it comes to righting the ship, a big part of that is going to be the availability of the stars, right? Like, I thought this even before the start of the season, before things went downhill. Like, the only way for Philadelphia to build the type of team that can compete with the Celtics is if these guys are on the floor for 55 to 60 games. together. Like the Suns are a great example. Like they had injury issues last year that led to their big three playing like 40 games together. And I think that cost them in the playoffs. Like I think that lack of familiarity, the lack of continuity, chemistry on the floor cost them something in the playoffs. I thought the same way about Philadelphia. And now here we are at 2-11. And it's already clear Joel Embiid is not going to play in back-to-back situations. Probably not going to play, sporadically during these 4 and 5 nights types of situations. It's a problem. It's a legitimate problem for this team that is going to be tough for them to overcome. Now, there's going to be a lot of focus on Nick Nurse. And, I've had a lot of NBA people kind of text me over the last couple of days, kind of like, is the Nick Nurse watch on? Like, what's going to happen in Philadelphia? I don't think Nick Nurse is in trouble right now, but I am curious to see how much life this team shows over the next 10 days to 2 weeks, right? Like they've got a couple of games at the end of the month, early December. I think there's one game at Detroit and another one at Charlotte. If they're not showing signs of life, Mark, around that time, I'd keep an eye on that situation down there, because then you're getting into December. You got 3 or 4 games in between then. The hole you'd have dug would be pretty deep. I don't think that, scapegoating Nick Nurse is not the solution to the problem. I don't even know who replaced Nick Nurse on that bench, but scapegoating Nick Nurse is not the replacement there. It's not the solution, but it's always the easiest thing to do, right? And there are certainly concerns about Nick's rotations. I mentioned what Joel reportedly said, where it's like, I don't know how we're trying to play out here. So there's some issues there. So that would be the thing to watch the closest, I believe, would be Nick Nurse's place with that team. Again, it's not a situation where bring somebody else in, all of a sudden all is resolved. This is on the roster. Like these guys have to play. Another thing, Mark, this is like Joel Embiid should not have been at the Olympics. He shouldn't. Like, I don't care how healthy he was going into it. This is a guy with chronic knee issues. I mean, his history of injuries, you have to scroll down multiple times to get through it if you're reading on a laptop. Like, he is a oft-injured player, and oftentimes those injuries are connected to his knees or his foot or whatever, lower body stuff. Like, I get it. Get the chance to play for USA Basketball, win a gold medal, that's appealing. But you just signed or about to sign a contract that'll pay you like $250 million, bringing your total revenue up to $500 million. Like, you owe it to your team to spend your offseason being as dedicated as possible. Like, I don't know if, not spending his summer just straight conditioning had any impact on the injury or the setback or whatever it is he dealt with, during before the start of training camp. But the right decision would have been to sit out and spend your offseason completely committed to getting your knee right. That was a mistake, and I think that is costing Philadelphia right now.
Yeah, I mean, we even saw in the Olympics that he seemed pretty limited as far as what he could do. There were games
What is he even doing there then? Like, what are we doing? like the Kawhi Leonard stuff. What was Kawhi even doing there? Like, I love the Lawrence Frank line like that. We really wanted Kawhi to stay. Come on. No, you didn't. Like, Kawhi, I'm not even going to go on this tangent right now, but like, you're at these Clippers games, Mark. Like, is anybody even talking about Kawhi? Does anybody have any idea what Kawhi Leonard is doing right now? Like, it's almost Thanksgiving.
We do. He's only been doing shooting. There's been this kind of hey, weekly update because they don't give timelines. Before Monday's game against the Warriors, since it was Monday, it's like, hey,
because they're afraid of Kawhi Leonard. That's why they don't give timelines.
And Ty said he's out for this week. He's only been doing shooting. So, yeah, that's wild. The thing about USA Basketball, not to go down a rabbit hole, but since we've already gone down there, I asked Ty Lue before the season because he was Team USA assistant about Kawhi during that time and what did people see that led him not to be playing in the Olympics. And he's saying, oh, I don't remember. But then when they announced that he wouldn't be ready for opening night, he did finally acknowledge that Kawhi did have a setback during USA Basketball, not training camp, but USA Basketball. So the idea that you were talking about, that Lawrence Frank is, bemoaning, oh, he should have been given an opportunity by Team USA officials to play in the Paris Olympics, doesn't add up here.
No, It doesn't any player with a history of chronic injuries. And look, there's a benefit to playing for USA Basketball. We talked about Steph Curry, the springboard. It seems like he's gotten off that. LeBron, I'm sure there's a lot of reasons LeBron is energized to start this season. His son being on the roster is among them, but he gained something. And younger players very often gain something from that USA Basketball experience. But if you're a Joel Embiid and you're a Kawhi Leonard, you should be nowhere near a USA Basketball training camp during your offseason. You should be committed to strengthening whatever injuries that you have so you're ready to go for your team. So I don't know what's going to happen in Philadelphia. I think the door is open for them to go on a run and get back to being the team that we thought they were going to be, and that's going to begin whenever Tyrese Maxey comes back into this mix. But they are on some very thin ice right now, and I think they're 10 days to 2 weeks away from maybe doing something there internally, doing something with that team.
Yeah, and Chris, to your point, while we've seen, the shortcomings of this team's roster, I don't see the roster solution of what Daryl Morey could do before the trade deadline. Now, Daryl's always been aggressive, creative with moves, but the reason why I'm skeptical that they address this from a personnel standpoint is Daryl's put all his chips in this. I mean, they carved out cap space to get Paul George on that max deal, and they were obviously cognizant of his injury history. Same thing with Joel Embiid, with having, on paper, good players that could form roster depth. Clearly, it hasn't been enough. I think if I had to predict how this plays out, I think because of what they have as a team, they can dig themselves out of it, but only to an extent. I think that because of how bad of a start this is, they're going to be just having to make up ground the rest of the season where they're always treading water, but you'll at least see a much better version of how they're playing. But yeah, that's not what they signed up for. This is a team that was expected to not necessarily beat Boston. They've been the favorite, but at least be in that mix of having a puncher's chance.
Yeah, and it's a short window, right? Like, given Paul George's age, Embiid's age, their injury history, they signed George that 4-year contract and gave Embiid that extension, but realistically, it's 2, maybe 3 years that this team can compete at the highest level. And this team's going to be really expensive over the next couple of years with 3 guys basically on max contracts. Mark, great stuff as always, man. Check out Mark over at Sportskeeda, Sporting Tribune, Fox Sports Radio, among many other outlets that he's working for these days. Great to catch up, man. I will see you out in California real soon.